I can't tell you how sorry.
He could barely speak. His voice trembled, choked by tears that had waited 30 years to fall. Across from him sat the man whose life he had forever changed, Michael Watson, the fighter who lost more than a match that night. But instead of bitterness, Watson reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder and said,
It's all right, it's okay, bro. Let's move on in life. Peace and love. I love the Chris.
It was a moment that stopped time. Two warriors bound not by rivalry, but by pain, healing, and an unspoken understanding of what it means to survive. This is not just a boxing story. It's the story of a punch that altered two lives, a night that broke one man and haunted another, a tragedy, a triumph, and a reunion that transcended everything we think we know about this brutal sport. Before you judge what happened in the ring that night, you need to understand what came after it. Chris Eubank wasn't just undefeated. He was untouchable. A showman in every sense. He walked like royalty, spoke like a poet, and fought like a man who believed destiny had already written his victory. Brash, eccentric, and unapologetically confident, Eubank carried an aura that could fill arenas before he even laced up his gloves. Fans either loved him or hated him, but everyone watched him. On the other side stood Michael Watson. No theatrics, no flamboyance, just a fighter's fighter. Calm, intelligent, and surgical in the ring, Watson had earned respect the hard way, with grit, skill, and quiet dignity. He didn't need to sell a fight. His hands did the talking. He was the people's man, humble, focused, and fearless. Their first clash in June 1991 was everything boxing fans hoped for and more. A grueling tactical war where both men left parts of themselves in the ring. When the final bell rang, it was Eubank who got the decision. But to many watching, it felt wrong. The public was divided. Some called it a robbery, others called it politics. But almost everyone agreed this wasn't finished. 3 months later, the rematch was signed, and this time, it wasn't just a fight. It was personal. Pride was on the line. September 21st, 1991. White Hart Lane. The air was thick with tension. Over 16,000 fans packed the stadium. From the opening bell, it was clear this wasn't the same fight as before. Watson came out with purpose. No waiting, no hesitation. He pushed Eubank back with stiff jabs, crisp combinations, and relentless pressure. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting to prove a point. That the first result was wrong. That he was the better man all along. Round after round, Watson executed with precision. He controlled the tempo, walked Eubank down, and slowly drained the confidence from a fighter who was used to dictating everything. By the middle rounds, the tide was undeniable. Eubank, who once seemed invincible, looked vulnerable. He was getting tagged more than ever before. The crowd sensed it. Watson was carving out a career-defining performance. 1 round at a time. Then came the 11th. It was brutal. Watson cornered Eubank and unleashed a barrage. Shot after shot landed clean. Eubank had never been dropped in his entire career until that moment. Watson connected with a crushing right hand and Eubank hit the canvas. The stadium erupted. It looked over. Eubank was spent, dazed, legs like jelly. For the first time, defeat wasn't just possible, it was inches away. But what happened next changed everything. With seconds left in the round, and with nothing but instinct and desperation, Eubank pulled himself up and threw a wild uppercut. Blind, reckless, and perfect. It landed flush on Watson's chin. A punch born out of survival, not strategy. It snapped Watson's head back violently. And just like that, the entire dynamic of the fight flipped. When the 12th began, Eubank, running on adrenaline, came out swinging. He stormed forward, catching Watson off balance. The referee, seeing the damage and danger, stepped in and stopped the fight. Eubank had done the unthinkable. He had pulled off one of the most dramatic comebacks in boxing history. But as he raised his hands, the crowd went silent. What looked like triumph was about to turn into something else entirely. Something boxing would never forget. There was no celebration. Watson collapsed in his corner. His legs gave out. His body shut down. And just like that, the night changed forever. As Michael Watson lay motionless in his corner, the roars of the crowd faded into an eerie silence. What began as a night of boxing brilliance had transformed into something deeply unsettling. The air at White Hart Lane turned cold. Spectators looked on. By the time he was finally transported to a hospital, it was already too late to undo the worst of it. Watson had suffered a traumatic brain injury, bleeding and swelling that required immediate surgery. He was operated on multiple times. The doctors managed to save his life, but the damage was devastating. He was left with partial paralysis, limited speech, and a future that would now be defined by painful recovery instead of prize-fighting glory. But this tragedy wouldn't just scar two men. It would send shockwaves through the entire sport. The public was outraged. The British Boxing Board of Control was slammed for its failure to provide proper medical care at the event. And in the aftermath, emergency protocols were overhauled. What happened to Michael Watson forced boxing to confront its darkest truths. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, the story of Michael Watson was far from over. Because what followed wasn't just recovery, it was something more. Something that would one day bring Eubank and Watson face to face again. Not as enemies, but as men forever changed by a night that boxing would never forget. Chris Eubank walked away from White Hart Lane a winner in the record books, but inside, he felt like anything but. The image of Watson collapsing haunted him, not just for days or months, but for years. Every time he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a champion. He saw a man who had hurt someone beyond repair. The guilt became a shadow he couldn't shake. He never spoke about it much in the early years, but his demeanor told the story. Gone was the bravado, the cocky strut, the flamboyance. In its place was a quietness, an unease that followed him into every fight. The killer instinct, the edge that made Eubank great, was gone. Something inside him had changed. Something fundamental. He later said, "That fight destroyed me. My spirit was snatched." For a man who had once lived off his aura, that was a brutal admission. His performances became inconsistent. He still fought top names, still won some, but the fire that made him fearless was no longer there. And deep down, Eubank didn't care about belts or applause anymore, not when the cost had been another man's future. But while Eubank wrestled with guilt, Michael Watson began a journey that defied belief. Doctors had given him little hope, paralyzed, barely able to speak, stuck in a wheelchair. Yet Watson refused to accept that fate. Inch by inch, day by day, he clawed his way back. Years of grueling physiotherapy, countless setbacks, unimaginable pain, and still he kept going. Then, in 2003, the impossible happened. Michael Watson completed the London Marathon, not in hours, not in a day, but in 6 long, excruciating days. He walked every step with the same resilience that once carried him through 12 brutal rounds with Eubank. And beside him, Chris Eubank himself, walking shoulder to shoulder, no longer as a rival, but as a man seeking redemption. That moment, 2 former warriors moving forward together, was more powerful than any championship belt. It was a symbol of forgiveness, of human strength, and of the unbreakable bond born not in victory, but in shared suffering. 30 years. That's how long it took for Chris Eubank and Michael Watson to truly face the weight of that night. Not just as fighters, but as men. Decades of silence, pain, and unspoken emotion finally brought them to the same room. This time, not in a ring, but in front of cameras, hearts laid bare.
To still be here and it's, I can't tell you how sorry. I can't tell you how sorry. Yeah, it's
Come on, Chris, it's all right, it's okay, bro. Let's move on in life. Peace and love. I love you, Chris. That's all in the past. Let's move on in life, Chris. We're here together. Let's live in love. I love you, Chris. Let's move on. We are born warriors. We are real. God bless you, Chris. One love. God bless.
Boxing had brought them together. Tragedy had bound them. But forgiveness, that set them free. True warriors fight not just for glory, but for peace. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. We bring you the real stories behind the gloves where every punch tells a deeper tale. and true character is revealed.